This video is GTViewer's Dynamic Graphics Part 3, and it will cover some tips and tricks and also some advanced features. If you're interested in specifics on dynamic labels or dynamic highlighting, go back and watch Parts 1 and Parts 2 of these videos. This particular video is going to cover things that apply to both the dynamic labels and dynamic highlighting, and also just some features that didn't fit in with the other two videos. So let's get started. The first item I'm going to go over is the different modes for the dynamic graphics interface. And the first two videos we only showed the admin mode, and let me just bring it up quickly. And this is the same interface we saw before. It lets you turn the dynamic graphic items on and off. It lets you edit them, it lets you create them, you can reorder them, you can import them, export them, and everything else you can do with them. And this is usually a little overwhelming if you're a user and you don't need to create them, and also it takes up a lot of space. Now there is an option to collapse the dialog, which it still has the same functionality, but it hides most of the dialogue, so you have more of your room here, and you can always just pop it back out if you need to do something specific like this. All of the different buttons are the same here when it's collapsed. It's just you don't have the access to actually do the edit. Now let me close that out. And it also remembers the settings, so if we open that back up, it would still be collapsed. And let me open it back up. Now let's also run the user mode. This is very similar to the collapsed one, except it has a lot less buttons and features. It basically allows your user to turn on and off the dynamic graphic actions, and you can turn them all on, all off, and you can actually select one and move it up and down to change the order that it's drawn. And we'll go over that a little bit more later. And you can select one and press display on since it's off, or you can just double click on it and it'll toggle it. I'll click it again and it'll come back on. Now that's the same as the admin version, except it has all the extra information that you can add and edit. And this is a good version of the interface to give to a user if you don't want them to have access to creating and editing the dynamic graphics. And the way it works is, in your GTM file, when you define that you want to have the dynamic graphics interface available, you can give it a mode, and that mode is either admin mode or the user mode. And you can have both of them, as I have here, although you can only use one of them at a time. Okay, the next item I want to go over is the restore button. If we go back to our admin mode, by default, you're going to get the list of dynamic graphic actions that are defined in your GTM file. And these are predefined by whoever sets up your data, and they're fixed, although I can edit them to do different things, or I can add to them, I can delete them, and you know, it's up to me as a user. Now if I save my session in GTViewer, all my changes are saved in that session. If I don't save my session and I start a new session, it's going to go back to the defaults that are in the GTM file. Let me just kind of quickly demonstrate this. I'm going to delete some. I'm going to pick a couple to delete. Let's say that I don't want this one anymore, and let's say I create a new one. I'm just going to call it test, and I'm not even going to define it because it doesn't really matter for this purpose. And at the bottom here there's a restore button, and like I say, the restore will clear out all my custom changes and revert back to the default in the GTM file, and it makes you confirm it. I'll say yes, and it goes back to the default items. Now I could delete these items or add new items and save them in my session, and I'll have those as long as I have my session. Every time you open your session back up, it will use my custom set of them. The next thing I want to show is creating a new dynamic highlighting action and using some features we haven't used before in the other videos. So let's review what the highlight circuits by ID did. This is just, let me turn it on by double clicking. This is just showing or highlighting each primary conductor line and coloring it based on a map of the circuit IDs. So if we look at our map setup under circuit color, this is a map that directly maps these circuit ID values to a color weight line style. And you'll see those colors are based on all the different circuits. Now, this demo data is pretty small and can have a different color for every circuit, but this could be expanded to any size of data that you've got. And what we're going to do next is create a new highlight circuit action. Only this time I want to highlight by orientation, whether or not it's overhead or underground. And to do that, I want to say new. I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call it orientation. And this time I want to copy from circuit because they're very similar. And I don't want to, and it'll save me a little bit of time in filling out all the different parameters. So I'm going to say OK. Here's orientation. It's an exact copy other than the name. So it still says it's highlight circuit by circuit ID. And it just has a different name. And we have to change everything we want to make it the highlight circuit by overhead or by orientation. So let's go in here and say change the name to orientation, highlight circuits by orientation. We can leave it the same category, same feature list. It's primary conductor line. The criteria is true. We want it to do it to everything, and the highlight is a regular, or the type is regular highlight. Now, our highlight by circuit ID uses a map that we've already defined called circuit color. And if I look over here at circuit color, here it is mapping these, values to the color. And we're going to have to create a new map that does above ground and below ground. So let's go back to map setup. I'm going to say new. I'm going to call it orientation. Let's say orientation map just to be less confusing. I don't need to copy it from anything. I'm going to add one new item for overhead. I'm going to change the color to this blue color. I want it to be a thicker weight. I want it to be a solid line. I'm going to say that. Now I'm only going to put one item in here because I'm going to let everything else use the default. And the default is defined on the other form. So let's say OK. Now we have to change our highlight circuits by orientation to use the orientation map. And we also have to change the map value. We're no longer using the circuit ID attribute in the connectivity table. We need to use the orientation attribute, and it's in the primary conductor table. So I'll double click on that. It puts it up here in the expression. Our expression could be more complicated, but in this particular instance, I can just say it is the value that's in the database. So I'll say OK. The next thing here is to use a default value. So anything that's not overhead is going to be whatever color I put here. And I'll say this orange color. And I'm going to go ahead and apply it. And you'll see here that it's kind of hard to see some of them because we've got the circuit ID on. I'm going to turn it off. And here it's easy to see. So anything that's above ground is this solid blue. Anything that's underground is this dashed orange. Okay, now I want to make a few tweaks to our settings here to make it look a little better. The first thing I want to do is increase our weight on our default color, which is the underground. I want to make it a thicker weight, and I'm also going to make it a solid line. And I'll apply that. And I'm going to hit emphasize mode just to make this a little clearer. And previously when I tried to show the highlight by circuit, the styles were about the same size, so you couldn't tell which one was which. Now I'm going to turn highlight circuits by circuit ID back on, and you'll see that now we can see them both clearly. If I zoom in a little bit, you can see here the dashed green line is the circuit ID, and the thicker orange line is underground for orientation. And let's look at this one here. You can see the magenta line is the circuit ID, and the blue line is overhead. Now, we can see this by default here just because of the order of the actions, but sometimes it's necessary to move your actions around and to actually see them, and that's kind of what is happening here. Is just already done by default. What happens is these are drawn in the order they appear here. Actually, the reverse order. So orientation is drawn first, so it's on the bottom. Then it draws the next one that's on, which is circuit ID, and so it's on top of orientation. You can think of it as, in this list, as how they're going to be stacked on top of each other. And to show why this is important, let's zoom in a little bit so we can see this better. And I'm going to select my orientation action. And you'll notice here in the interface there's a move up and a move down. And this moves the selected item up or down in the action list. So as I move this up, now it doesn't do anything yet, but once I go above circuit, it goes behind this orangish colored for underground. And it's still there. If I turn my orientation highlight off, see, it's still under there, but you can't see it when it's on top of it because it kind of blots it out. Now I'm going to have it selected again and press move down, and we see it again. And that's what the move up and move down is for. And this comes up every once in a while. You may have several things in the same spot and you want to see certain things over another, or always make sure one is on top of the other. And that's what this move up and move down will do for you. There's also a few things we can do with our dynamic graphic actions here to save this information, such as putting it in our GTM file, or we can import and export this information. And I just want to quickly run through this so you'll know that it's available. Once you have your dynamic graphics set up the first time, you know, it's only going to be in your session. So to get that in your data, there's a couple ways to do it. Now, there's a copy info button here that once you press it, it copies everything, every setting that we have here to the Windows clipboard. And if I go to, let's say I copied it to the clipboard, I'm going to bring up Notepad here and I'm just going to paste it in. And it's just a list of different things, and it may look a little cryptic, but there's some order to it. The top part is always the maps for your value to color, line weight, line style, and fill. They're always at the top. And then for each of your actions here in your action list, there'll be a section like this right here. And it's a one-to-one correspondence to the values here for the action. Now, it may be a little cryptic and the names may be a little different, but it does match up one-to-one. And you could probably figure out what all they are if you really wanted to, if you wanted to create these manually instead of using the interface. But there's no reason to do that since you have the interface. Although it might be easier to tweak some of the settings here if you just want to do something real quick and not have to go through all this and then reset everything. So, okay, so I have this in a notepad here, just text. What else can I do with that? Well, if you want to make this part of your data, you can go to your GTM file and go to the additional properties section, which is usually at the bottom, and paste all of this in. Just, you know, this whole thing. The whole set of this, which is what you get with the copy info button. And these are the entries for the GTM file to set up the default dynamic graphics actions. And when you do the restore button, that's what it's restoring, what's in the additional properties section. Now, that's the quick way to do it. So once you get it set up, you copy info, go to your GTM file, go to the additional properties section, and paste it in. You save it and reopen up a new session. These dynamic graphics items will be there. Now, there's another way to do this as well. You can say, I don't want to save that. You can also say export, and I'm just going to call it, I've done this before, so why it's there already typed in. I'm going to say orientation I9. Now, it's going to save this file into this empty directory. And if we go to that file, I'm in this directory, in this prompt here, I'm just going to open it up. Orientation. I shouldn't have called it orientation because it's got everything, not just orientation. It's the whole set of actions. Now, you can cut and paste this and put in your GTM, Or in your GTM file in the additional properties section, you can say load supplemental file equals in this file name, and if you put this file name in with your data, then it will load it in from the file instead of having it actually in your GTM file. Now that's a good idea usually because these can be quite lengthy. I just have a few here and mine aren't very complicated. You could have very large maps that could take up, hundreds, thousands of lines, and you might not want that in your GTM file or directly in your GTM file. It's still in your GTM file when you say load supplemental file. It's just that you get to put it in a separate file. And what can you do with that besides putting in your GTM file? You can just say import in. Now, I've already got all these set up, so let's do a restore, which is going to replace my current set of actions with what's in my current GTM file, which is the default for the demo data. Now, so you'll notice our orientation went away. But if I say import, and this is my directory where I exported this file, and it says, do you want to replace it? And here's my orientation back. So if it's got a file or the same name in, I believe it replaces it. If it's not there, it adds it. So, and here we have it, it all works like it did before. And that's a quick way to get information in and out. Now, you don't have to put everything in there. You could say, let's say we went to our file here, and let's say we cut out, let's cut out everything that's not part of our highlight by orientation. And that just leaves our one map entry and our settings for our orientation. Now, if we save that as orientation, you could send that file to somebody and then they could import it into theirs and then they would have it. So that's an easy way to get these around without having to modify people's data or wait for a new data to come out or a new data set to be published and everybody start using it. You could just send them that information. You could send them the whole file, but if you just want them to send them that one particular action, you can send them that one thing. They can import it and continue on. And as long as they save their session, it will save it for their local machine or their local session that they have. Okay, one last thing I want to show is importing your map values. Now this is a new feature with this 2007 version of the Dynamic Graphics interface. So if you're on an older version, you'll have to upgrade to this one to get this feature. But it can be pretty handy for creating these maps. So another change is that before you could always click the map button to get to the settings. Now you have to have an action set because there's some association between them that it keeps. And that's just how it works now. So you'll notice here that there's a import and export. Let's first let's pick our circuit color and say export. This is in our let's call it circuit color, and it's a CSV file that it's going to save. And it exports it. I'm going to just double click on that and open up Excel. Let me get it, since it is a CSV file, and let me get them so you can see them at the same time. It's always these values. It's got to be value, red, green, blue, weight, line fill, or line style and fill. Let me space that out so you can see it. Now, as long as you have these values, and it doesn't matter if you have more, you could have any other columns out here you want, but you have to have these, and they have to be these names. They don't have to be the same. They don't have to be uppercase. It's case insensitive, but it has to be value, red, green, blue, weight, line style, and fill. Now, as long as it's in this format, I can do import and import it in. So let's create a new map here just to demonstrate that. Now it's going to be the same thing, and I'm going to call it test, and you'll notice it's empty. I want to do import and I'm going to say, oh, it can't read it because I have it open in Excel. That happens to me every time I do this. I closed Excel. Let's try it again. CSV file successfully imported. And now, unfortunately, it's exactly the same as this, but we could have created that information however you want. You could do Oracle distinct statements, or and SQL, or anything that you can imagine. I personally use GT Query to build a prompt query, and then there's another GT data tool called GT Dump Query, and it will export out the contents of a query. And since it's a prompt query, it's the unique values. Now that's a roundabout way to do it, but if you don't have Oracle or a database to do it from, it works just as well. And you just have to put it in Excel, or however you make your CSV files. It doesn't have to be Excel. And you can take that and import it in, and while there's only 8 or 9 values here, it's not unrealistic to do these manually by saying new item and entering each one individually, and that's how I did these. But let's say you had 100 or 1,000, and then it gets a little more tedious, and you're going to want to import. Now, in the past, people have just manually modified those entries in the that you put in the GTM file, and because it's a pretty standard format and it's not hard to figure out, and it's easy to do. You can still do it in Excel and just put pipes in between instead of commas, and then export it out, and that works just as well. This is a little cleaner and easier, and does some of the work for you, and it's an easy way to get it in there. So, and that's new, and new with this 2007 version, and it'll be in there in future versions as well. That concludes this video on GTViewer's Dynamic Graphics Part 3, which is tips and tricks and advanced features. I hope you learned something, and thanks for watching.